So, Danny, you recently had to go into a doctor's office to get your blood drawn, which I imagine for others right now could be a very nerve-wracking experience. Can you tell your experience of going to get your blood drawn?
Yeah.
Content notices for this episode include mentions of the coronavirus pandemic, mentions of transphobia, and things related to medical transition. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rule 63 podcast. My name is Anna Marie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers.
And I'm Danny, and I use he series and they series pronouns.
We're still in the thick of it.
We are. We're gonna be in the thick of it for a bit of it.
Is there any part where it becomes the thin of it, or is it just thick, non-stop thick? We're not gonna call this episode non-stop thick. We promise. How are you, Danny?
You know.
We're surviving.
Yeah, I bought hair dye. So.
Oh, we've gotten to that point.
Even though I'm getting married maybe in a few months. So it's time to destroy my hair.
Yeah. I mean, you can dye it for the wedding, I guess.
We've hit this point.
We've hit the point of dyeing our hair, huh?
Yeah.
This is what it's come to. I'm at the beginning of week 5. Week 5 of being inside all the time. And it's just now starting to be like, not the most fun. I'm a homebody. I would say I'm a homebody. I am not big on wandering, traveling, being able to stay inside and just like do my own thing and be productive at home has been overall good for me. But now it's starting to be like, wow, I could use a hug or something.
I'd like to be somewhere else.
I would like to be somewhere, anywhere. Today we're going to be talking at a very specific angle of the coronavirus situation. So sorry we're going to make another fucking coronavirus episode, but it's what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
So if you want to tune in, we are going to be talking about how COVID-19 specifically impacts the trans community.
Yes.
Which intersects the trans community in a very interesting and unique way. Some more than others, obviously. But if you want to learn about what you might need to do or need if you are trans, or if you are just a curious listener wanting to learn how you can best support your queer and trans siblings and nibblings, whatever you want to call us.
Nibblings are nieces and nephews.
Whatever. Maybe you have queer nieces and nephews. In which case, you can tune in. You know what I mean? So.
With that introduction.
With that weird introduction, we have to also say that we're not medical experts. So Google shit before you try to actually implement any like specific medical advice.
Yeah.
And if you are trans, we can't necessarily tell you exactly what you need.
We could just make you aware of some of the information.
Yes. So the best resource, I'm just going to tell you the resource right up front. The best resource that I could find, transequality.org/COVID-19. That's transequality.org/COVID-19. That's it. Anything else? Any other disclaimers before I just jump in?
I think we're good. I think that's it.
Okay, cool. So just like broadly, I think just as the coronavirus thing was really starting to become serious and started being, a thing that we all needed to care about and stay inside for, it was towards the beginning of March that a bunch of LGBTQ health organizations started putting out all these posts like queer and trans people are particularly susceptible to impacts of the virus, which is not to say that anything about being queer or trans somehow makes you more susceptible to literally getting sick.
The virus knows
It's
you're
just
gay.
that the virus is homophobic. No, the virus is not homophobic. However, as we're seeing, as you know, the virus impacts many different communities differently. It does impact the LGBTQ community. So, for instance, LGBTQ people have higher rates of HIV and cancer. They use tobacco at a rate 50% higher than the general population. They're more susceptible to things like homelessness. So all these sort of intersecting issues that would make getting a disease much harder.
Yeah.
There's a stat out there that says more than 1 out of 5 transgender adults have at least one or more chronic health conditions like diabetes, arthritis, asthma, and are generally more likely to be immunocompromised because, again, of things like HIV and AIDS. And there's also something that we mentioned a few episodes ago in our episode 15, medical gatekeeping, about how fear of discrimination might keep trans people from going to the hospital, and going to the hospital might result in different or unfair treatment. We talked about the trans broken arm syndrome, where if you go into a hospital with a condition completely unrelated to endocrinology or hormones, the doctors might be like, I don't know what to do, because they're on T or E or whatever, even though that's ridiculous, but it's still something that trans people face in the medical system daily. And the whole other side of this is mental health. So the queer community is at a higher risk for mental illness and at a higher risk for just feeling socially isolated. Our hearts obviously go out to all the trans kids at home who have to be with their parents. Although, I think Danny mentioned, or someone mentioned this, like, now is the time to transition, right?
Oh, yeah.
When you can just, like, be inside for several months at a time.
Yeah.
And then come out a completely changed person.
Come out completely new. Get all the awkward shit out.
We're all gonna come out of this. Get all the awkward shit out. Go through your emo phase, whatever. Take some selfies. We've all done it.
Yeah.
And then there are other things.
So one of the other things for, like, generally for LGBTQ people is that we have a problem for elderly LGBTQ people, because especially at the, like, time where they would be forming families and stuff like that, it was a long time ago. So there's lower rates of just, like, having a partner or having children, and a lot of elderly people are supported by their children, and so the LGBTQ people don't have contact with, like, any family members as a support system, and then they're going into homes that sometimes, like, they have no control over, and they can face, like, discrimination that they can't really do anything about. So that's sort of, with that already being a problem, and the fact that this is going to, like, disproportionately impact older people, it's like that population is specifically at risk, and they don't really have a support system.
Yeah, it's super fucked up. Support your queer and trans elders who paved a way.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of organizations, if you just, like, Google LGBTQ elders, like, that come up, that are, like, trying to help do that.
Absolutely.
Like, give a support network.
Yeah, so Google what's available in your community, or just Google and support whoever. There's bound to be GoFundMes and things, Patreons, all that sort of things. Anything else for the general population?
Just people having their medical stuff postponed. A lot of people's transitions are being put on hold. So this time is already stressful for, like, everyone being, like, trapped indoors or whatever, or just being out and about, and then stressed out about that because you still have to go to your job. And so on top of that, you're then dealing with, like, having to push back something that frequently takes a really long time to get set up anyway. So like people will be waiting 2 years for a surgery, and then they've had it postponed now. So it's just like an extra stress that some trans people are dealing with at this point.
Absolutely, yeah. Something that you've been looking forward to for a long time, now getting postponed even further. It just feels bad.
Yeah.
But all the more reason to reach out to your loved ones and see what they need and just let them vent.
Yes.
You know? Barring anything else, there are specific things that the transmasculine community and NB communities are dealing with specifically as well. So if you're not aware, COVID-19 is a respiratory illness, so it impacts your lungs, and I'm sure you have a lot more about this to say than I do, but things like binding, you need to be particularly careful with.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about that, Danny?
Well, so the thing with binding is that basically every time you bind, like, there is some risk that, like, you're gonna hurt yourself slightly or more than slightly. Like, people talk about how, like, safe binding, like, only do safe binding, but there's really not 100% safe binding, because you're, like, intentionally squishing your organs. And I think sometimes, like, we don't want to admit things like that, because it's like, if you're like, oh, binding can't be 100% totally safe all the time, that gives some, like, transphobic person an excuse to not let their kid have a binder and, like, make their lives miserable. But it is what it is. And so the thing to keep in mind right now is, one, if you are starting to get sick or, like, starting to have the breathing, like, problems, you really need to not wear the binder, even if you're someone who wears it, like, all the time. And two, it's probably a good idea to limit it anyway and really practice the, like, only wearing it for, like, a few hours at a time, like, really diligently, because if you hurt yourself, it's going to be that much worse if you then get the virus.
Yeah, or if you just generally land yourself in
a hospital. Like, you don't want to be in a hospital right now.
Yeah, so literally any unsafe activities need to be stopped, and anything specifically that you do to your chest needs to be reduced or completely stopped.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it intersects with mental health, because if you just stop altogether...
Because some people aren't going to be able to 100% stop, and that's just how it is. But one of our problems is obviously not having, like, data on stuff, because there aren't enough studies. But there was, like, one study on binding practices that I was able to read the abstract and nothing else for.
Wow, great.
And that linked injuries from binding very strongly with just, like, how long and how often you're doing it. So, like, as much as you can limit it, like, now is the time to be limiting it. Like, above all else, like, including, like, just, like, different types of binders or different types of binding, like, the length of time seem to be, like, the clearest, like, yes, that is something that's causing it.
Yeah. Thank you for that, because it's something that I obviously have limited experience with.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that you recently switched from testosterone injections to testosterone gel.
Yeah. You asked me a question and it did not come out.
It was the answer.
It was the answer? Yes.
That was the whole bit, you know? A lot of people, because they can't go to a doctor.
I lost some of your audio, so I got confused for a second there.
Yeah, no. Oh, sorry, that wasn't very clear.
Technical difficulties.
There are also people, dear listener, who got testosterone injections done by a doctor.
Yes.
And now have to start switching to testosterone gels or other things because of not being able to go to a hospital or go to a doctor all the time.
Yeah. And testosterone gel
Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, testosterone gel is frequently is just like more expensive, which is why people like one reason why people tend to take the shots, because the shots are seem to be the least expensive option, at least based on like my insurance and like things that I've heard from other people. So switching to gel might not be an option for everyone, but you know, there's also subcutaneous injections that some doctors do, and then you would still be getting the same prescription, and they're shots that are less difficult to give yourself because they're not nearly as painful because you're not stabbing yourself in your muscles. So that might be something to look into with your doctor. But yeah, and if you have to switch to the testosterone gel, that's what GoodRx is for.
Tell me about that. Are there any complications with like having to change up how blood tests work or anything like that?
So, my blood tests were like 3 months for the first year, every 3 months, and then I'm like annual now because we haven't changed my dose. So for a lot of people, they probably aren't even going to have to worry about the blood test. It also depends on like how like neurotic your particular endocrinologist is. But as long as your dose hasn't changed and you've been on something for a while, like if you can't get your blood tests, you're probably going to be totally fine.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very lucky to have already be at the point where I've been on hormones for more than a year, and so I'm pretty much stable. But I know it can be tricky, especially if you're like switching from injections to gel. That could be a different thing that you have to like feel out. Like switching between types of how you get the medication can be tricky.
Because people have like, I didn't have much like noticeable change like all of a sudden, but people get different like effects when they switch types sometimes, and you might not like a type. Like you might switch to gel and not like how it affects you. But
yeah, it's just one of those things that it's different for everybody.
Yeah. And
it's difficult now because if you're having specific problems with how a change in treatment is working, you should just like go to see your doctor, but you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of doctors are doing telehealth now. And I know, because I know in Connecticut, like you're supposed to have like a specific license or whatever thing to do telehealth, and our state government has like waived that and is basically letting everybody do telehealth because of this.
Great.
So it might be the same in other places. So look into if you need a doctor, look into how telehealth is working in your state.
So Danny, you recently had to go into a doctor's office to get your blood drawn, which I imagine for others right now could be a very nerve-wracking experience. Can you tell your experience of going to get your blood drawn?
Yeah. When I went and got my blood drawn, they had like tape on the floor, and then they were like letting one person in and asking you a bunch of questions like, what symptoms have you had these symptoms? Have you traveled out of state? Blah, blah, blah. And then they watched me hand sanitize my hands, and then they took my temperature before they let me get my blood drawn. And then in the blood draw room, they had changed the chairs so that they were had a recline basically, so that they were having you lean as far away as possible from the phlebotomist, who was wearing like a full suit and the like mask and everything. So like I felt like I wasn't gonna get anything, but it was very like, God, it was very dystopian.
But except for those weird few dystopian elements, it was functionally the same thing. Except they were just...
Yeah. It was much emptier because people weren't going if they didn't have to, but it was basically the same.
Okay, cool. I imagine that'll make people feel better. Or worse. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for that. Anything else you have to say about like the experience of going to your appointments, doing your hormone things?
I have doctors that have all have their messaging system set up online and like all of this stuff. So it's been pretty smooth for me because it seems like my doctors are used to using the technology. I imagine it's probably harder for some other people, or like small family doctors it's probably harder for and stuff like that,
For sure, yeah. I go to a fairly big, endocrinology office, so I was supposed to have a meeting like right at the beginning of the outbreak, and they just told me that they'd reschedule. They haven't contacted me, which means I guess I just skipped this appointment. But it was just like a check-in. It wasn't a blood draw, so yeah. I'm not concerned. I believe my next blood draw, I actually don't know when my next blood draw is, but it's probably not until later into the summer, so I think I'm A-okay there. I just kind of lucked out there. But it's good to know that, again, if you had to go to a blood draw, it can happen and that it will be safe.
And just avoid touching things. Just don't touch anything. When
just
you enter a building, don't put your hands on your face or anything that you're not about to purchase. Just don't touch things. It's very hard, but don't do it. That's obviously not the only way you can possibly contract it, but it'll really help you out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of these other final tips are things you may have figured out already, especially if you've been in touch with your medical provider, which hopefully you have been, if you need specific treatment or prescriptions or hormones and things. But stay informed, listen to scientists. We mentioned earlier in the podcast, reach out to people in your community, talk to people, identify those who are most vulnerable, the immunocompromised, the elderly, your queer elders, and those with the other needs listed above. I actually recently joined a couple Connecticut mutual aid groups. So I want to highlight the work of UCCO, Yukon Collaborative Organizing, who have put together a mutual aid group. And they're just generally a group of great Yukon activists that kind of banded up together to pray for change on campus. And they've done a great work at bringing people together. You can find their Instagram at Collaborative Organizing. Easy. And then you can join their Slack channel to learn more if you're in Connecticut or in the Yukon area. So that's fun. If you are of a particularly vulnerable community for getting the disease, you can do things like create an emergency contact list or get in touch with people and share your contact information and necessary legal documents and things with the people closest to you. If you're going out shopping, get sufficient access to things like hormones, syringes, alcohol swabs, whatever you need, vaginal dilators, medical equipment, grooming items like razors and cosmetics. I know I've been wearing makeup and shaving.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but that's big for me. I try to make razors last as long as possible, but you know what I mean. Legal documents, identifications. As far as I know, you can still change your name, although I have no idea how fast that'll happen. I haven't heard of any cases of people trying to start the legal name change now.
Well, the courts are running at a limited capacity.
Yes. So, and obviously you mentioned medications, prescriptions, assistive devices if you need that sort of thing. Obviously you can stockpile, but don't hoard these things because there are other people in the community that need these things. Anything else I may have missed in terms of what you can do right now?
I think that's just about it.
I tend to go in and when we do make an informative episode to try to go in. Lastly, I want to talk about Trans Needle Exchange, which is a free needle delivery service for trans people. transneedleexchange.org. I also want to mention a couple other things because this is impacting all of us, but it's also particularly impacting food pantries, sex workers, undocumented immigrants, those with HIV, those facing domestic violence, those seeking housing and financial assistance, those seeking internet access and things to be able to reach out to their community. If you need help with any of those things, literally any of those things, like we said, transequality.org/COVID-19/resources. And if you're at the University of Connecticut, which I certainly am, our Rainbow Center did something that also compiled these sort of resources at rainbowcenter.uconn.edu/COVID19. And that is my big spiel.
You did it.
We're going to keep this short today.
Yes.
Because it's just been a wild time in this past week or so.
And you don't need to hear us talk about
I have a midterm on
this
Wednesday.
any longer.
You don't need to hear about this anymore. You know what you need, and you are a capable person.
Yes.
But we wanted to share these in case people were curious or you hadn't thought of anything. I guess that is all for this week. I wish you all hope and strength in these trying times. We're going to make it through this, and when we get out of this, we're going to work together to create a better world.
We're not going to go back to the same old.
No. Not back to normal. We need to make a new normal. We need to fight for a better world. And we need to reach out to each other. I'm done.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. We have a very special announcement to make, I guess. We have our very first Patreon supporters. So snaps for y'all. You can find us on our Patreon at just Rule63, and all of our social medias and things can be found through our website, therule63podcast.com. Danny, do you want to shout out our new patrons?
Our new patrons are Lindsay and Chase. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay and Chase. I love you so much.
That proves we have at least 3 listeners now.
Yay. Thank you, Lindsay and Chase. We just wanted to shout you out in particular this one time. If you want, all listeners, if you want to be shouted out on a weekly basis on our podcast, you can give to us on Patreon. You'll also get access to bonus content like live streams and bonus little episodes. You can stop me if any of this is wrong or if you want to interject. But,
okay.
You can follow us regardless of if you want to give us money. You can follow us on Spotify, subscribe on iTunes, and follow, and everything on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, your social media of choice. You'll get informed of new episodes. Anything else, Danny?
That's it. I think we did it.
We did it. We even did the readout at the end.
Wow. Amazing.
Wow. I'm doing my best today. If you couldn't tell. Okay. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you learned something. And we will see you next week for more.
Bye-bye.
Bye, listeners.